We are live. Welcome, my name is Lorenz, and this is our Creator Conversation series from Sutra.co. And today I have with me Jessica Bockler, who is one of the founding directors of the Aleph Trust, which is an online university that offers programs around consciousness, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology. And I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today, Jessica. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and I'd love to start just to have you share a little bit about Aleph Trust and the work that you do.
Sure thing. So the Aleph Trust is an international organization, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to exploring the fields of consciousness studies, spirituality studies, and transpersonal psychology through higher education, but we also offer community programs. But a main focus of our work is in higher education. We run master's programs, we run PhD programs, and those are validated and in part delivered in collaboration with Liverpool John Moores University, which is a university based in the UK. And we run these courses around the world. They're online. And we have students from some 40 plus countries now who are joining us on these journeys and take part in the programs that we deliver, exploring what it means to be a human being alive in the world today. And that opens up a whole range of questions, but we very much look at that combination of inner work, personal development, self-development, what it means to work on oneself, and how that has to do with social change, transformative change in the world today, how we can address the big questions of our day, and so on and so forth. So it's an exciting organization to be involved with. Yeah,
you're teaching transformational material. Are you also trying to teach it in a transformational way? Like, is the intention also that that your students are, having an experience as they're going through the learning?
Very much. And in fact, we find that you can't really explore those topics of spirituality, embodied spirituality, and inner work and consciousness studies. And transpersonal psychology, you can't really divorce the sort of theoretical or intellectual learning and discernment from embodied and experiential learning and application. So we're in our programs interweaving the intellectual, the mind with the body, with the heart, with experiential learning, with practice, and then also application, taking these ideas into the world and exploring what are the sort of ethical ramifications of practice, which is a big piece for us as well. Yeah.
And no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say we do that in many different ways, so I could give some examples if you'd like me to.
I'd love to actually, the ethical ramifications. Let's follow that thread for a minute.
Okay. Maybe. Okay. I'll jump in and start somewhere slightly different, and then I can build on that. So if I look at our master's program, for example, it's a program that runs over 3 years. And in year 1, we have a module which is dedicated to learning through integrative practice. And their students very much focus on building their own integrative practice schedule, interweaving practices around the body, somatics, physical practices, with looking after themselves on the spiritual level, weaving in meditation practices, for example, and interweaving that with emotional inquiry, really looking into, well, what is it that I have to do for myself in terms of perhaps shadow work. So really addressing a kind of fuller maturation of the human being through first-person lenses, through first-person inquiry. And that happens very much in year 1. So year 1 is kind of very much focused on that sort of inward exploration, seeing what is it that I need for myself to look after myself as a human being. And then we build on that. And in year 2 and year 3, we take it into outward application. And I'm mentioning the year 1 piece first because a lot of learning as a practitioner, as someone who's working to apply something in the world, a lot of learning comes from self-inquiry. and self-discernment to see, okay, if I understand what it is that I need for myself, or what are the edges of my own personal development, then I can see how do I need to work with others, and what is it that I need to do in order to create a safe container to hold other people in their process and in their development. So it's this sort of two-way stream of operating. You can't really hold a safe space for someone else if you haven't looked at what that means for yourself. You can't really, support and nurture others' development if you're not working on yourself. Mm-hmm. So that interrelationship is something that we're looking at very, very closely throughout the program.
Mm. And a lot of these things are, I find they're not conceptual. You need to have a direct experience to really understand them. There's only so much, it's a combination, but there's only so much you can read about it until you have to discover internally somehow to really understand that.
Yeah, very much. And so the arc of the programs that we deliver often follow this pattern of looking at oneself, then looking at what are the implications, drawing from my own self-learning, what are the implications for my practice, where I do work in the world in whichever form that might unfold. And then also to complete the arc, or to kind of come back, there is an element of research and of evaluation to then see, okay, what impact am I generating in the world, and what does that mean again for me and my practice? So this is sort of not a circularity, but a kind of, maybe a spiral is a good image. We're kind of covering the same ground, but from different vistas, hopefully.
Like a feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Like a learning, like a learning process.
Yeah, very much.
So you started as an online university.
Yes, although the master's program that we offer had its sort of forerunner in a program that was delivered at Liverpool John Moores University, where one of the co-founding directors of the Aleph Trust had a tenure in psychology for a long time. So he was based at Liverpool John Moores University, and he was delivering a master's program looking at consciousness studies, looking at transpersonal psychology, or he called it the psychology of human potential at the time. And this goes back to the sort of early 1990s. And then the Aleph Trust kind of arose from or grew out of those roots 10 years ago, when myself and Les Lancaster decided to set up the organization. Les is the person who is was the psychology professor, is now Professor Emeritus, who was based at Liverpool John Moores University. Yeah, so there's a longer track record, as it were. And also the relationships, in terms of the members of staff, many of whom have worked in the field of transpersonal psychology for a long time. Working outside of the conventional university setting and setting up the Aleph Trust has enabled us to bring in a lot of people who have been working in the field for a long time and who are coming together and co-delivering this program, bringing their specialist expertise. Yeah, and that's one of the things that excites me about working in the Aleph Trust. Yeah,
so this is really interesting, because a lot of people I talk to, they're delivering programs in person, and then the pandemic forced them to go online. And I'm curious, what, if any, impact did the pandemic have on your work?
I know it's a really interesting one, because when the pandemic happened, so many universities had to switch to online education, and we were already doing that. So in that sense, for us, there was no change there. But we did notice a change in the student community and in what was present in our community in terms of the level of ambiguity, uncertainty, distress, and stress. Because people were, faced with so many difficult circumstances in their home lives, in their work lives, and that inevitably rippled into our community. So in terms of when it came to our pedagogy and our ways of working online, we didn't change very much. We were continuing with what we were doing and evolving that, and we always kind of looking back and thinking, how can we do this better and how can we improve? But certainly when the pandemic came, we were in a really good position to do what we were doing. And we received a lot more applications in the first and second year well, when the pandemic first started, and then the year after as well, because so many more people became aware of and interested in online learning. But yes, one thing we had to really take care of was well-being, for students and also for staff. How can we take care of each other? How can we look after each other in an online community, whilst holding that awareness of the underlying rising stress levels and levels of trauma that are very, very present for us individually, but also for us on a collective level. So that's something that we have sat with and that we've really paid attention to. And you might ask how, and
I'm curious, how does that inform like your program delivery process?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time really cultivating relationships. We do that by we have a personal tutor team that really attends to each student one-to-one. We also have smaller learning groups, as it were, where people are meeting on a regular basis and are sharing and reflecting on their learning processes. And we have a kind of well-being support who holds students who are encountering heightened levels of stress. We also try to help students to map out the learning journey to see, okay, where are the pressure points and where are things getting intenser? Because yes, we are delivering an academic program with assignments that are due on certain dates, and that creates a certain amount of pressure. But we're trying to create always a strong support network holding the students as they are going on this journey with us. And then we're also doing that for staff. So we really try as a staff community to connect, to be present with each other, to share practice. We do that in module-specific teams where we're reflecting on how we're working together, what's working, what's not working, what are we encountering in each student group. And then we do that as a staff-wide community to share practice, to share new ideas, or to share new ways of working that we're encountering. So, when we're meeting in the staff community, this year, one member of staff, for example, led a session in baking, sharing some really lovely recipes for organic food. And then another session was taking place outside where a member of staff led an open awareness exercise in nature. So people are always weaving in what it is that they feel could be enriching for the staff community, and that then hopefully ripples on into the student community as well. Yeah.
And it makes me think of what you were just talking about, which is the learning that you're also you're doing this yourself. You're constantly learning from your students and the journey that they're going through to somehow respond from a more informed place.
Yeah, yes, very much. And what for me is in the background there, really sort of supporting this, is a new way of thinking about learning and higher education. And by that I mean is that we're not seeing ourselves as lecturers standing in front of an audience delivering information, but rather we are joining with students in co-inquiry. We're researching with them new ways of being, new ways of thinking about how we can be in the world together, and looking at these bigger questions that are haunting us today, right? And acknowledging that we don't all have the answers. There are evolving bodies of knowledge, and practice and research contribute to those evolving, bodies of knowledge. And as someone delivering a course, I and others, other colleagues may have expertise in particular areas, but that doesn't mean to say that we know everything. Far from it. Much rather, we're kind of opening up the questions together and seeing, okay, well, here is something, here's an interesting theory, or here is an interesting practice. Let's look into this. Let's see, how does it feel when we enact this practice? What questions does it bring up for us as individuals? How might we take it in a particular context? Oh, and if we're then using that practice or deploying this practice, what ripple effects are being created? So we're sort of looking together at practice and theory, and thereby really inquiring into it, and then also hoping to refine it and to evolve it, and to kind of push the edges of our knowledge just that little bit further, step by step.
Yeah, and it's kind of radical for a university program to be taking this approach of co-inquiry. I feel like, and I very much resonate with this shift in thinking about what a learning experience is, rather than you have the expert and then you have the student who's there just to learn. That reframing it as that it's really a process of co-inquiry, co-learning, co-discovery, and so I'm curious if you can speak a little more about maybe what that looks like in practice.
So one module, for example, that we have in our masters is called Applied Transformative Psychology. And there we have an overarching module that explores how psychology can offer lenses into fields such as climate change, climate justice, social justice. Just trying to think of some other examples there, but we're looking at the bigger overarching questions that are to do with climate, with social justice, with health and education and medicine, okay, I'm going to try and be more concrete. But within this module, where we look at the overarching questions, we then also have specialist options which address fields of endeavor, like integrative medicine, for example, or creativity and transformation. That's an option that I'm leading within this larger module, where we're looking at creative practices and how they can be utilized in various fields. Another option we have is meditation and mindfulness, and how mindfulness is, a broad field of inquiry and practice that could be utilized in so many different contexts. Another option we have there is on counseling and psychotherapy, but looking at transpersonal models and approaches to that field of practice. And students jump on board with that module. They take part in the overarching module journey, where we have both kind of lectures conveying some key ideas around how psychological lenses might be beneficial for understanding individual and collective change. And then they also hop on board with some of these specialist options in order to kind of really go into those fields then, say integrative medicine, to see how can integrative and transpersonal and spiritual ways of working be brought into the field of healthcare, for example. And then what they do on that learning journey, again, it depends on each option. Each option leader has a slightly different approach. But one thing we do is to encourage students to dream up a case study plan where they're choosing a very specific setting and context in order to then say, okay, I'm going to bring an embodied mindfulness practice into, say, a hospital working with nurses. And they're mapping out how they might do that, and they consider what kind of ethical implications or what kind of pragmatic issues they might come up against if they try to do that. So that's one of the assignments as part of this module. And we've got kind of
they'll create this. They'll create this case study, but do they actually go out and do it?
Not in that module, but often students utilize this module as a springboard for their dissertation, which comes the following year. So the dissertation project is an empirical research project where students are then encouraged to go out into a specific context, enact a practice, and kind of really build a research project around that. And that often the case studies that come up in year 2 are then brought into that empirical research project in year 3. Yeah.
And there have been, maybe this was more relevant for you a few years ago at the in the earlier days of Aleph, and you're just turning 10 right now, right? 10. This is your 10 years. That's incredible. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Have there been any challenges that you've encountered in the online format, like that you've had to overcome, especially in the earlier days of really moving your work online?
I think one of the hardest things for us going forward and over the recent years has been maintaining a sense of intimacy and connection and
Mm,
organizational integrity whilst encountering phases of growth. When we started, our first cohort was 12 students in our master's program, and everybody knew everybody. And there was that real sense of, we just on this learning journey together, and we're co-inquiring, and it was really very, very special and beautiful. And then over the years, the group sizes have grown, to 20 students, 30 students. In recent years, 50 to 60 students per
mm,
year coming in. And that changes the quality of the connection. So what we have done is to evolve in sort of circular structures to maintain that sense of connection and intimacy in the encounter. So keeping to small groups whilst having these circles overlap, a bit like a mandala, right? Made of
mm.
different circles that are overlapping in just the right way so that information can flow from one circle to another. That has been an ongoing challenge.
Mm. I'm so
Yeah.
curious about the information from one. So what does that
Mhm.
look like in practice? I
Mhm.
mean, is that
Yeah.
running on some kind of platform? Is it just something that's kind of happening over Zoom? Like what does these
Yeah.
circles and the information flow between them look like?
Yeah.
And by circles, do you mean like the different cohorts, or you mean within a cohort groupings of people?
Yes, a little bit of all of that. So in terms of our learning experience, we utilize a platform called Canvas, which
Hmm.
hosts all our courses, and it has an integrated webinar platform. But what's kind of invisible and behind that is a kind of relational infrastructure that is constantly being reviewed and upgraded. And that begins with the way our teams are organized. So we really have circles of tutors now for every module, where there used to be, just one or two members of staff. There are now 4 or 5 holding one particular module, and so they're one circle, if you will. And then there is a circle of module leaders who are then sharing information with each other across a cohort and across the different years, so that we can kind of keep an overview of what's happening across the master's program. And then there are other circles that have to do with student experience and student well-being. And those are staff circles, but then also circles of students. So on the staff side of things, the personal tutors that we have that look after the pastoral journey of our students are linking up with our well-being support. And also we have an academic learning officer who looks after the kind of academic development needs that students have. So all those team members are interfacing in a circle and are sharing information as it's emerging in the system, as it were, in the
Hmm.
different learning cohorts. So that really helps us to share the information across the board. And then on the student experience side of things, we have student reps, as any other university course would have. But the student reps are meeting on a very regular basis with our student experience coordinator in order to share and reflect on what is the learning journey, what are you noticing, what's present in your cohort. And that information is then fed forward into student and staff circles that meet several times a year. So there are all
Mm,
these touch points, and it takes a lot of time to organize those
hmm.
circular structures and information flow. That's a big part of my work these days, is
Mm,
to really attend to the information flow and to sense into the gestalt of the organization in terms of what it needs are, what its needs are energetically and structurally. I'm constantly sensing what is needed in the different parts of the organization. Yeah,
I
it's an
love that you're
interesting
bringing this like
challenge.
this
Yeah.
sensing aspect of
Mm.
maybe say a little more. What does it mean to sense into that? Is that a
Yeah,
intuitive process, a data driven process, or a little
yeah.
bit of both?
Both. There is data, and of course there's the ops team who are equally feeling in. So I'm not doing this alone. There are other people who are attending to other structural and relational concerns, as it were. So I'm not doing that on my own. But a big part of what it is that I do overall is to look at the data and then sense, and it's a kind of embodied sense-making process. I'm working through my own body. I also constellate in my office here dynamics that I'm noticing that are emerging amongst the staff, amongst the students. So literally constellating in terms of, utilizing objects to kind of place them as symbols on the floor and see what are the relationships between these roles and these individuals. But then I'm also feeling that in my body. I'm noticing, what's the heart of Aleph Trust? What's the information flow or the blood flow like? How does the bone structure feel? What is needed on all those kind of organismic levels? So for me, the organization is like an organism, like a creature that is growing. And I pay attention to it on an intuitive level as well as on a sort of more intellectual, data-driven level. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. Of course, with Sutra, it's very similar where we're always sensing the organization as an organism and very much feeling it in our bodies in a way. And so I know that a big part of your background is in like drama arts, and I'm curious about. I also noticed that you teach a course on this on Aleph, like working with expressive arts practices, and I'm curious, like how has your experience been bringing that into the online format? Like, how do you teach expressive arts practices? What does that mean?
Yeah, I love doing that. And it's been a real joy to experiment with what's doable online and how far can we push the boundaries. And so much is possible online. It's so remarkable to see, what people can do. So yes, I mentioned this overarching module, Applied Transformative Psychology. And within that, I deliver a specialist option which revolves around creativity and transformation. And there I draw on my body of training in theatre, in movement and voice practices for self-exploration. And how that practically happens is, well, in webinars, for example, I might deliver some theory, but I also weave in experiential exercises, experiential sense making. So I invite people to, when I explore certain aspects of theory, to then also pick up a pen, do some free writing, maybe some doodling, mark making, to move away from the computer screen a little bit, not to be constrained by cable, but to be able to then move in the room, to explore in an embodied way, and to play with the webcam, because you can come into a kind of different relationship. This is like a filmmaking device, isn't it? And you can engage with it creatively rather than just sort of sitting down and traditionally delivering or relating to an audience in more sort of traditional ways. So I play with what is possible within a webinar. I also offer experiential exercises, short podcasts that students can access and utilize in their own time for their own creative sense-making processes. And I invite them generally into considering what creative media are really alive for them. What do they want to experiment with? To give that a try within the option that I'm running, to try out new things and then report back on practice in order to share, what worked for you, what didn't work for you, why didn't it work because that's always the really juicy and interesting bit. And we do a lot of collective dialogue and sense making around that. So yeah, we are online, obviously. Then we are mostly sitting in front of the computer and engaging in reflection, but we can also play. And people play a lot in their own time and then bring that into the learning experience.
Can you give me an example of a specific activity that you like?
I love to, when I open a webinar, I open it standing. I have music that I stream and I move with people. I encourage people to do some authentic, spontaneous movement practices. Sometimes some people have webcams on. I encourage webcams on, but sometimes people turn them off. But
Mm-hmm.
certainly when the webcams are on, we can then also come into relationship and move together and kind of see, okay, what's possible right now between us? Can we play a little bit with the movement that we're seeing on screen? So a bit of movement mirroring, but also maybe responding to the music that's there. A little bit of play as well, because you can play through the screen. You can pick up a ball and throw it across to you.
And is that an imaginary ball or a real ball?
That's right. You can pick up that imaginary ball and pass it to another person, right? And you can pass it back and you can play with that. What could that become? So I love to just be playful and see what's in the room, see what are people coming with. Every cohort's different. And then I build on that really and see, what wants to happen. One year I had a cohort that was very oriented towards visual arts. There were a lot of kind of visual artists in that particular group. And so I encourage people to, do photography, go on a photography walk, bring that back. And we create a little gallery online to share what visuals are with you, where you are. And people were drawing and sketching and sharing that. Those sorts of things as well. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So
I go with the flow.
I love that. Go with the flow. But I'm curious now, just to like maybe explore the other side of that. I mean, especially because you're working with this transformational material. Have you had situations where something's come up in a space? Where you tried an activity and it didn't work out, or maybe you tried something and there was something that got activated in the space, and how like.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that? And have you had moments like that?
Very much. Yes. Yes, that has happened. And I'm very attuned to who is coming into the room with me. This particular option that I'm mentioning, it's in year 2. So when students are coming into that, I already know quite a bit about them because they've been with us for about a year and a half. And it's really important, yes, to calibrate what happens in the room. And there are ways for me to do that. So for example, when I start this particular option, I have a forum where people introduce themselves in creative ways. They share a little bit about what are their edges, what do they enjoy, what do they find difficult. Some people will speak to saying, theatre is not my thing. Doing this sort of embodied movement, authentic movement work, that really makes me nervous. I'd rather not do that. So when I have that information, it then helps me calibrate how I might engage a particular group and how I might encourage or work with people who are feeling this is not quite my thing, or it's putting me out of my comfort zone. So I sort of make a pledge to the students, as it were, to hold the space in ways that are really supportive, and I try to cultivate the best awareness of the edges that may be there. And then the students also make a pledge to be present to each other in non-judgmental and caring ways. So whatever is being shared in that particular group is confidential. It's not taken outside of the forums that we might have or the learning sessions that we might have together. Trying to think if there are other things. That's what's coming up for me right now. But there's this. It's a listening mainly. It's a fine-tuned listening to what is coming into the room, who is there, and what are their needs and their requests around how we engage with each other, and then sensitively building on that. Yeah.
Kind of comes back to the sensing that you were talking about. Like feeling what's in the organization, but also feeling what's in the space and what's emerging there with the people that are present.
Definitely. And when something does come up in a session, sometimes I've run over time because something may have emerged. There may be tears in the room. There may be a need to pause and to do a breathing practice, to ground. So I'm really, again, then very much sensing what's in the room and seeing what is needed. Very rarely we have it that somebody might drop out, right? It's an online learning space. If you're in a physical space, somebody walks out, you can go out with them, right, and see what's happening. I can't do that in an online learning space. But what I can do is immediately follow up after the session and see, I check in with that person to see, are they okay? And or if I'm feeling, oh, there's a need to follow up immediately, we have emergency protocols in Aleph Trust where we contact other members of staff to then do the follow-up to make sure that that person is okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and something you just shared about kind of, I guess it's part of the sensing of the space, because earlier you talked about co-inquiry, and I think another big part of this work is co-responsibility in a way, like creating a space where we're all holding it. It's not just Jessica who's holding the space, but really it's all the participants. And I think a big part of that is really how you invite people into that process, because the safety of the space comes from not Jessica holding it perfectly, but from feeling that all the people in it are going to hold it perfectly. So I wonder if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, I love that. And we do a big orientation week at the start of each academic year. And that helps us to look at exactly those kinds of shared responsibilities for co-creating the learning space or the inquiry space. But it's an ongoing conversation as well with students, with different members of staff, with the module leaders to see, okay, what does the holding require right now? And how can we, what is it that we encourage the students to do? I mentioned that at the beginning of my creativity option, there's a pledge that the students make, but we have that at the beginning of the learning year as well. So students, when they first come in and they join the program, they undertake a pledge for themselves and for others to really consider what is it that they're offering, that they're bringing, and how will they co-hold the space with each other. So it takes a lot of framing to kind of
conversation.
get that right. Yeah, conversation, definitely, yes. Yeah, and on an ongoing basis. Yeah.
Yeah, and I as we kind of bring our conversation to a close here, just I'm curious how you think about engagement, because you also mentioned this distinction between in person, you see the people. If someone walks out or something happens, that you can find them, you can approach them. Online, sometimes it can be the Wild West in terms of like a person's in their house, they have their kids, they have all this stuff going on. If all of a sudden they're like, I'm out of here, that's it. They can disappear. And so I'm curious, how you think about creating engagement and participation in an online space.
I want, setting up the space in the right way is a big part of that. So when it comes to these experiential sessions or collective dialogue sessions, we do try to encourage members of staff and students to really consider be in a space that is safe for you and conducive for you as much as possible, so that you can partake in the conversation in a way that that feels really that really honors the time investment that you're making, because we're talking about master's level study, right? So that's important to bear in mind, because it's at that level people are making enormous investment in terms of their time and their resources to to go on a long journey, 3 years. I think because it's at that level of investment, people are also then considering, what is it that I need for myself in terms of the learning space and in terms of the personal space to then be in a place where I can partake in deeper ways. So, how to set up your home learning space, how to create time in your schedule so that you're not sitting in your car on public transport and listening to lectures, right? And some people might want to do that, sit in a cafe. But of course, you can't partake in the same ways when you're in those kinds of public spaces, right? So I and others, we're always reminding people of that and saying, hey, this is an experiential session coming up. we're going to ask you to be moving, or you'll be sitting with eyes closed, or, you know, you might be making strange sounds. Hey, that's one of Jessica's sessions. So you need to be somewhere where you can do that comfortably and really get the most from it. So it's kind of, again, framing, signaling, giving information in advance, and helping each other co-create not just safe spaces, but sacred spaces. And when I say sacred, then really it comes down to setting intentions for a kind of deeper listening and clearing space, making empty space in order for something else to come through, that, you know, maybe channeled, maybe sourced from beyond the self. So that's, of course, a big part for our courses as well, given that they're in spirituality and in areas of, concerned with, you know, we're exploring the sacred, deeper connections to earth, deeper connections to a sense of the cosmos or the higher. So all of that, it's an ongoing conversation, and a responsibility on our part to provide the right framing, and a responsibility on part of the student to really consider, okay, how do I commit fully, and how do I cultivate the right ways of working and the right intentions for myself? That was a big, long answer. I hope that was helpful.
That was so beautiful, because, I mean, for me, it really speaks to what I think is at the heart of this kind of work, which is about, you know, ultimately an invitation to responsibility, that each person is really, you know, responsible for their experience, but also that it's, you know, that it's participatory, that it's, you know, that we're all co-responsible for creating a learning experience where the value of that learning experience comes from the participation, that comes from people feeling responsible for that. And that ultimately it's not that there's a secret formula for that, but that's very much a conversational and an ongoing learning process. You know, it sounds like that's very much, you know, for you, what I'm hearing is that it involves a lot of conversation, a lot of framing, a lot of kind of continuous learning and inquiry. And that's been exactly our experience as well, that it's not like, this is how it's done, here's your 5-step formula. It's basically the way that it's done is through conversation, and, you know, you're delivering learning, but you're always learning in that process.
Yeah, very much, very much. I abhor 5-step formulas. No, I mean, sometimes it can be really useful, right? In just kind of providing a map and opening a door. But then when you've opened that door, something drops away, you know, whether you call it ego attenuation or, you know, expanding consciousness, opening the aperture of your perception, something else wants to come through. And then we have to permit ourselves to allow ourselves to engage with not knowing and receiving information, and then follow through with that. And that's the beauty of the process. But it's also, there is uncertainty there. So we've got to just constantly listen in and fine tune. Yeah.
I love that that's where we're ending, not knowing, you know, this is the art of truly being human.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Jessica. Really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you and hear a little more about the amazing work that you are doing. And of course, happy 10-year anniversary for Aleph.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. A pleasure to talk to you.